So good morning.
We're keeping.
I'm Kevin Shorner-Johnson
Yeah.
from E-Town College. I serve as the Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities at E-Town, but my heart and soul, a lot of times, well, not my butt, but my heart and soul is doing piecework, and been working on the Master's in Music Education and Peace Building for some time, and it's just been that's been I think one of the best gifts of my professional career to watch that program take off. Next week we'll welcome the 5th cohort into that program. We have another 6 people joining us, one from all the way over in Western Canada, so it's really starting to become more of an international program. We have our foot in 9 or 10 states now. And it's a lot, it's speaking to some needs that are out there in education, particularly how does a particular tradition of peace building speak to needs of trauma, students coming into classrooms with trauma? How does it speak to social emotional needs? How does it speak to also the weariness of teachers and wanting to reclaim maybe a spiritual sense of self within the classroom? So it's doing all those things together. What is today is a presentation. Actually, I delivered a keynote just a few weeks ago at the Pennsylvania Music Educators Association as their featured researcher, which was kind of trying to mash together my 5 years of work on belonging and trying to figure out if there's any meaning to be made out of all that work. And so I have presented to the Sunday school class before with some stuff on belonging, so you'll see some resonance of what I've already said in this room. But you also see some new things, which is I've done some work this year with the neuroscientists. I've done some work with a social cultural psychologist on emotions. Did a lot of work with Donna Hicks on dignity, who's a big peace builder in the world, and trying to figure out what do all these voices have to say to belonging. So, yeah, and if you'll humor me, what I'm going to do, I have my keynote speech, and it's very tightly scripted down to the second. And so what I'll do, and it has to match the video, so I've got to stay like on task. But what I'll do is I'll, for the most part, stay the script, but every once in a while I'll try to come off script so that we can actually frame it in this room beyond an academic conference as well. And so I'll see how well I can do that or not, and have to go from there. So. And the goal here is to bring other people's voices into the room and for me to be in dialogue with these voices on belonging. But here we go.
To myself and connect me to others. And when
it has to start at the beginning, or else everything is off.
Music became my survival mechanism. Music became my way of finding a sense of love and belonging. And so I had that tool of singing to really connect me to myself and connect me to others. And when I got on stage when I was younger doing plays and musicals and things, people would applaud, and I would feel a sense of, oh wow, so this is a moment where someone's actually celebrating me in my school community, and it felt really good.
Good. Should I have my microphone on my computer?
No, this is okay.
Okay, great. So this excerpt with Taina Asili, who came to E-Town College this past fall, who identifies as a Puerto Rican singer, speaks to the importance of belonging. And as I listened to more interviews, I became fascinated by this word and the meanings that this word carried. For Taina, this had a meaning of the self in the face of racism and homophobia. For others, it was different. Oftentimes in scholarship, our job is to tighten and delimit definitions such that a concept can be measured. As we make definitions tighter and more discriminate, we often elevate the level of conversation. And then sometimes I want to let this word relax, allowing it to hold a diversity of meanings. And as we embark, I hope that we'll allow this word to relax, holding space for different perspectives. So my major questions today: what is belonging? And what crises does it speak to? How do we balance individuation with assimilation? How do we belong in and across? And how do we enliven belonging and offer repair to belonging badly? And I'll note that at the very beginning, I'm going to frame it from a spiritual perspective. When the US Surgeon General Vivek Murthy wrote his book on loneliness, he offered an alarm about a public health crisis. Much of his work draws from a meta-analytic review by Holt, Lundstad, Smith, and Layton on the mortality risks of loneliness. They made headlines in the finding that loneliness was an equivalent mortality risk factor to smoking 15 cigarettes per day. In 2021, the World Health Organization called attention to loneliness as a global risk factor for marginalized populations. And in an age of school violence, Kelly Ann Allen reports that social stratification and ostracization are some major risk factors for school shootings. Let's listen to the Ikeda Center on the demand for dialogues about loneliness. This is a center that's up in Massachusetts.
Yeah, I would echo that. I've really sensed that word belonging it's everywhere now, and yet it's such a complex word.
Yeah, we actually, was it 2019, Kevin? Maybe early 2019, we had an event on loneliness. We called it the Loneliness Epidemic, and that was actually our highest attended event. I think close
to 90 participants.
Yeah, it was really big, and there were many people who actually had never heard about the Ikeda Center before. A lot of times, the people who come either have been here before or who have friends, but for that event specifically, people had seen this topic or even Googled events on loneliness, and they came really seeking this connection.
I think that's going to work. Others might point to absences of connectedness and disconnection as a democratic and societal crisis that leaves us feeling like we have no common spaces of community and dialogue. And research stemming from some studies like a cyberball study tells us that disconnection hurts, that we process disconnection in the same places in the brain where we process other forms of pain. Belonging has also been attached to the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, with institutions adding belonging to the work of chief diversity officers and student support and retention plans. And as a peace builder, I am interested in how our unbelonging intersects with violence and our capacities for ecological care. A node in an ecological system that identifies itself as radically individuated is dangerous to an interconnected whole. Dan Siegel writes, "When this happens to renegade cells in the body that grow without regard to the complex living somatic system, we call it cancer." In the seminal 1995 article by Baumeister and Leary, they defined the belongingness hypothesis. They noted that belonging is essential to human flourishing and requires stable and enduring relationships of meaning. While Baumeister and Leary wrote of universality, Cohen and Allen defined belonging as contextual. I may feel belonging in a place like this room, and then I go somewhere else where I experience threat or uncertainty, and maybe it's in a classroom where I'm minoritized or feel inadequate. Jeffrey Cohen writes, "Belonging is less like a keystone belief and more like a perception that is continually recreated anew in every situation." I find value in holding religious and spiritual frameworks alongside social science because our constructions of belonging are about meaning and value. John O'Donohue, one of my favorites, writes, "No thing can be itself completely without the other. No one can be herself without the other sisters and brothers. The one who dreamed the universe loved circles and created everything with such beautiful incompletion that we need the others to complete the circles of identity, belonging, and creativity. Life is full of magnetic interims that call what is separate and different to become one, to enter into the art and presence of belonging." As I have taught courses in ethnomusicology, I have understood that notions of belonging are different across cultures. Within Hindu and Islamic frames and Central Asian cultures, be and longing are separated as two parts that need each other. So Jeff Long, we'll see if the audio works here in a second, if it's too loud or not.
Belonging itself is seen as a particularly powerful form of empathy because when your loved one is, let's say, traveling and you can't be there, that sense of missing the person is a very powerful expression of love, and it's said to be one of the sweetest forms of bhakti, that someone can feel that deep longing for God.
Sandeep Das of the Silk Road Ensemble spoke of longing and belonging as fundamental to dissonance and resolution within Indian music.
Next time when you hear this track, or next time when you hear this track, or whoever is listening to it for the first time, there is that sense of longing and belonging, and stories of Radha and Krishna and the usual love and the love lost. But for us, it was questioning why we human beings can't just see reason and be, one and only spread love, so that there is no question of losing someone or being separated from someone, which we were seeing so much at that time. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I'm just telling you what was going through our hearts.
How does belonging look differently across cultures? A fascinating article by Kelly Ann Allen explored differences of meanings of belonging across languages. Terms varied from Australian Aboriginal understandings that represented intertwined belonging between land, spirituality, ancestry, and kinship, to a Japanese term that connoted a place that you can return to. As we move deeper, I invite us to hold space for differences. Linda Brewer's model of optimal distinctiveness has helped me as an important framing model in my work. We'll listen to Elizabeth Parker.
Maybe like a dialectic, an idea that we kind of hold these things in tension with each other. We hold the self with the group in tension, and then because of that, I think that if you hold them together, that they will mutually kind of work themselves out, but never one really more dominant than the other, because I think they are mutually dependent too, right? So the idea that like the selves are growing has to be part of the group growth. If selves are not growing within the group, then the group's not growing either. So you have to have, they're almost like nested. But to me, the issue is in vocal identity specifically is like how much are we able to be ourselves in a group and express our voice, metaphorical and musical voice within this collective.
I think I'll go off script here to say that what in essence that I've heard on a repeated basis is that music is always this balancing act between the individual sense of voice and then aligning that voice with other voices. So we're always kind of navigating, like, how do we assimilate as a part of a group? And then also, how do we become known for our individuality and the uniqueness of who we are? And it appears that when we hit wherever that balancing point is for each of us, and it's different for each of us, that seems to be one sense of belonging that's out there. So I'm interested in synchronous musical experience, social identity development, theories of prosocial behavior, and the role of attachment theory. We're going to listen to Renee Tembe, who's talking from Greece and her work with refugee choirs. Here, just a second.
Who have their eyes awaken. It was literally like this, what just happened? It's someone wants to listen to me. Listening to you in your heart and being heard and being remembered or being seen as a person, individual. Music has allowed that to happen with so many. And again, not just refugees. I can see this too in university students. I remember the university students that you're not just part of the non-audition choir, that you have to take this class. This is an opportunity for your students to examine what do they believe and who they are. What is my voice? Is it valuable? Music allows us to say, for me alone, allows me to say, you know what, I love this music and this music makes me come alive. And I have something that I can communicate with this music. So I can be heard. And it's good and right for me to be heard.
She directs a Syrian refugee choir off of one of the islands of Greece, and her husband is a refugee. And she spoke extensively about what is the What's the ability of a child to articulate their being and their value as being more than just a refugee? And music seemed to express that individuality. And so I'm going to move on, that I'm working with this idea that teachers are fundamentally situation crafters. And in being situation crafters, Cohen notes that teachers, good teachers, are like a dinner party host, easing boundaries, making connections, and welcoming each person for who they are uniquely. As I enter different classroom spaces to observe student teachers, I see how teachers expertly craft classrooms of belonging. I see the teachers who stand in the entryway of their classroom, greeting each student by name. I see the teachers who build confidence and autonomy through scaffolded chains of skill development. I hear the language of community and individuality in rehearsals. I like to refer to the arts as a laboratory of belonging. Belonging can be understood through what I also call the sizing of the self. In Bacha Mesquita's book, she's a wonderful cultural psychologist, she noted that emotions are movements in our relationships with people in the world we inhabit. As we experience love, we draw closer to others. With fear and disgust, we move farther away. Emotions can also be about power. When I experience anger or pride, I move up in power to express my being. With shame or embarrassment, I resize myself smaller, accessing the humility that is needed to offer apology for change. Selves sometimes resize and unfold through awe experiences that offer humility, vulnerability, and new perspectives. I think Naomi's preached on this. Dr. Keltner writes of awe experiences as containing a sense of vastness or revision of understandings. When individuals watched videos of galaxies or ascended to the top of a bell tower for a panoramic view, researchers found significant entanglements of awe and humility. Steller and colleagues wrote, awe would appear to be one way to encourage this balance of self-interest for the interests of the group. Humility offers unique and independent pathways to social cohesion. But let's return to artistic peace building. If the arts are a laboratory of belonging, what if artistic experiences are explorations of emotion and relationship, allowing us to play with the sizing of the self? As I watched my daughter over here at Eton Middle School, and she was in the middle school play this past spring, and she was Cruella de Vil. And I would watch her sing in show choir and play the flute. She experiences this play with her sense of self and emotions, and the sizing of the self that leads toward belonging. And my love to Ben Fortier over at Eton Middle School, and just how incredibly talented he is at building kids up. Interconnectedness, empathy, and perspective taking are central to artistic imaginations within the work of belonging more broadly. I asked Brent Talbot, one of my good friends, about Balinese notions from the island of Bali of collectivism and
It's that notion that musicianship can be stronger when we all get together to work on this, and that we all value things that we bring to the table. And so our agency is tied to this interdependence between participants so that we can, and everybody has some strengths and some weaknesses, and we're stronger together than we are individually.
Our senses of integrative, interconnected, and intra-connected belonging are powered by our capacities of imagination. If the arts are places where we play with imagination, they also might be sites of play with connection. Sandeep Das.
It's amazing that even our music has this element of the balance, which I don't see in a lot of other music. For example, let me recite a composition, that will give you an amazing insight and see how it's balanced. So, da, gina, gatakita, gina, gatat, gatikita, gata, gadigana, nagina, nagina, takita, gina, gatat, gatikita, gata, gadigana. So now if I take it apart, But see how beautifully it's balanced. The da is getting balanced by the ta. So that's, I would say, it's very integral to the philosophy, to just the sheer awareness with which I grew up. There is always hope that we are merely trying to keep the cycle and the balance, not hoping, we are praying that if we are able to maintain this cycle, maintain this balance, we are nothing in isolation. Nothing has grown in isolation. And there is good and bad. There is, light and dark. There is winter that's around the corner, but there still is spring. As long as we are able to keep that in our hearts, reaching out to the next generation, as long as we are able to leave them with these thoughts, there is hope, and we will die with hope.
And I championed my greatest sense of composure was to keep it after he did that rhythmic cycle. And you listen to a Grammy-winning composer articulate that rhythm. These visions can lead us to the centrality of empathy and perspective taking. I've done a lot of work with the 2016 study of early childhood storybook readings. I find this study to be magical because it's the sense of how children enter a sense of shared imagination when they read a book together. And many of these kinds of readings develop increased rates of eye contact, turn taking, and imaginative play, which are the foundations of pro-social behavior. In Lawrence's profound chapter on empathy, she writes that music is fundamental to catalyzing an empathetic response and is at the heart and soul of peace-building work. And I should say that in October, a bunch of us peace builders, about 20 of us, are going to all gather in Tokyo to have the first World Summit on Music and Peace Building. So I'm excited to join in that spirit. My work this year with neuroscientist Nina Kraus led me back to a 2009 study on the effects of musical training on subcortical processing of vocal expressions of emotion. While that sounds complicated, it's basically listening to the cry of an infant, a baby. And if you've listened to a baby's cry, you know that babies have many types of cry. A cry for when they're hungry, a cry for when they're tired, a cry for when they're angry. And the ability to recognize differences takes a very high level of subcortical processing to be able to analyze frequency and pitch. So they asked this question, do musicians have a higher rate of accurate response to a complex audio stimulus like that? And the answer comes to be yes. The people with 10 years of musical training and musical training prior to 7 had improved stimulus representations of pitch and timbre and an increased ability to understand the meaning behind an utterance. Authors reflected, if our results provide initial biological evidence for enhanced perception of emotion in musicians, if we are to develop the capacities of emotion and empathy, investments in heightened sense of musicianship may be worthy. So belonging in and across, I'm a little bit behind, that's fine. I want to briefly explore belonging in and across ecology, bodies, time, and threshold. I ask how music and the arts might respond to the greatest challenges of peace building and belonging in our current and future moments. One of the greatest challenges facing peace building is climate change and ecological collapse. As a peace builder and educator, I see ecology and climate change is fundamental to understandings of patterns of human migration around the world and our need to expand processes of belonging. So my early interview with Pennsylvania Dan Shebach took me down this ecology journey, but then later,
Because in essence, it's singing to a place. And the other thing that you talk about is that some of the most sacred places are rivers, springs, or caves, or places where the inner world kind of comes to meet the surface level world. Could you introduce maybe the sacredness of E and how this singing to place interacts as a sacred act?
Yes, that's exactly right. That people sing to places, and they sing to the spirits of those places. So if you believe that the world is inhabited by spirits, then the task of music is to make an offering to a spirit. And those spirits are most commonly present in points of contact between the inside of the earth and the outside. So a place like a spring would be an obvious place to go to have a communication with the spirit.
So just to back up, so Ted Levin is talking about an indigenous population that lives kind of on the southeastern part of Russia, the Tuvan musical culture. And in many animist traditions that are within indigenous peoples, you sing to particular places to recognize the sacredness and the spirituality of a particular place. And so I've been really interested in that musical tradition as maybe a way back into a sense of care. Kind of off script, so I'm trying to find my way back. In just a second, you're going to hear an audio clip of a Tuvan singing to the natural world. And what I think is so magical about this is that the Tuvan is imitating sound of a creek. So a good Tuvan can, when they really do it right, they can sing 3 pitches at the same time. And they're trying to imitate the sound of a creek. And in imitating, they feel like they're becoming closer spiritually to a sense of care for that place. My close readings of Tyson Yunkaporta, Robin Wall Kimmerer, and Sean Wilson have taught me that indigenous relationality
Indigenous languages
requires
are intersubjective in that they don't have a construct or subject. They are a part of everything and everyone else is a part of them. So object is almost like not part of the lexicon of how they understand the world in relation to themselves. I think that Western languages like the English language and the Spanish language has a different kind of value system embedded in it where the object exists. And as a matter of fact, you can construct language in such a way that anything can be narrated into an object. And I think this was possible. This is the reason that the objectification of indigenous peoples was possible.
That's Marta Gonzalez talking about indigenous populations in Mexico. Our educations need to move beyond the naming of the world to enter into the vibrational hum of the resonating. What does it mean to belong in relation to our place and all of the species that inhabit the here? For the sake of time, I've cut many of my sections on belonging across bodies and time. But just briefly, with bodies, I'm interested in how trauma creates a dislocation of embodied being. Daughtry's texts on soundscapes of the Iraq War speak to location and dislocation that's caused by sound and trauma within returning veterans.
I just feel really appreciative of those before me who did what they had to do so that I can do what I'm passionate about doing and what I want to do. Like my grandmother, I was saying my mother immigrated from Jamaica, and her mother, she is an educator, but when she first came here for many years, she had to do a lot of jobs that weren't necessarily her passion, which is educating. So in a lot of different ways, the more recent past and then like the more distant past as well, I'm very appreciative of the sacrifices of those before me.
I think your line, "I am the dream of those who believe," is such a powerful line in your singing. So yeah.
Thank you. I am the dream of those who believe. 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 Those who perceive.
So belonging across time. So this is an exploration of African diasporas. Music may be a way of playing the past into the present and reconnecting us with the lives of ancestors and allowing our senses of ethics, care, and belonging to be changed. When we belong to our ancestors, we seem to have a different perspective on the world. Returning to the idea that all belonging is contextual, what happens when we cross thresholds from one context to another? What are the roles of imposter phenomena and stereotype threat and offering doubt? What are the roles of affirmations, hospitality, and growth mindset? Kevin Coakley and Lisa Orbe Austin named doubts about whether or not we belong within the frame of imposter phenomena. While imposter phenomena looks different for each person, it is generally a tax on our abilities as we continuously doubt our worthiness. As teachers, this line of research intersects with a lot of research on growth mindset, attribution theory, and beliefs about talent. When we believe that our abilities are malleable, like we have the ability to change, we believe that we all belong and have potential. On the other hand, when we believe that our abilities are fixed, that they can't change, we continuously question whether or not we belong. As teachers, one of our tasks might be to shift beliefs about talents where all may have the potential to belong, whether musically or otherwise. Now I'm going to shift to Korean Samonori and look at how our capacity for change is at the potential for conflict transformation. As I explored Korean Samonori with Catherine and Young Lee, I became interested in how we perform the curious difference that is necessary to build architectures of peace. And I'll say in this podcast, in Korean Samonori, it's a worldwide genre. People come together and they costume in different ways to perform difference. So if you're from Mexico, you dress in Mexican Aztec attire, you perform Korean drumming.
So there was a show element to it. And I think on a visual level, they wanted to show all of the different countries that were being represented. And so on a visual level, you know, these kinds of costumes or national markers then are meant to display to the audience, like the difference. That entrained difference was, you know, it was cultivated by Kim Duk-soo in a way to show unity, but to also show difference. There was this other level of performing difference that appeared in that particular performance that I think was, you know, designed to show both the spread of Samonori, like look how many countries Samonori went to, and also to show that all of these different people could come together and play this music at the same time, and it would be coherent and it made sense.
Within Korean culture, the performance of Samonori is a way to challenge Western colonialism that took root in Korea, and a way to re-articulate the fact that people of different nationalities, beliefs, and identities can come together. And when they come together and synchronize their rhythms, there's something magical that happens. So next, I want to turn to a neuroscientist that I worked with this year. Nina Kraus is one of the leading neuroscientists in the United States, working with Renee Fleming a lot of times. And she's looking at the ways in which sound is also the architecture of belonging.
Sound connects us. Sound connects us really better than anything I can think of. It is a way of feeling that you belong to a group that might be singing your songs or speaking your language. We live in a world now where there's a lot of isolation and loneliness and depression. And I think that a lot of that comes from a lack of connection.
Music and sound can be enlivening agents of belonging. In enlivening agents, I want to explore properties of when we play rhythms together, how we match our bodies to each other and superordinate goals. I was fascinated by a 2020 study on interbrain coherence between an audience and a violinist. Wearing headgear to record cortex activity, audience members and the performing violinist demonstrated remarkable synchrony in specific regions of the cortex. It was fascinating when you actually watch a musical performance, the brains start to synchronize with each other between an audience and a performer. Marcus Santos, from his Brazilian heritage, talks about synchrony within percussion ensembles.
There is that sense of belonging. There's that sense of holding each other accountable, as I mentioned. Like there's a sense of the town system too, as in like I'm gonna sit next to Kevin because Kevin is a better player than me, so I can actually play with Kevin. I can follow Kevin. So there's even that level of camaraderie. That can be either Kevin next to me or Kevin across the circle. So I have access. And plus sonically, you can not only hear, but you can also see the other members of the ensembles. They are playing a different instrument than you are. So there's even that level of connectivity in that circle.
From Santos's album, Batucache, used with generous permission from Santos and his record label.
The synchrony is this power of being together in the moment, and it's the foundation of interconnectedness, trust, group membership, and attachments of family and friendship. My work with medical ethnomusicologist Ben Cohen notes that synchronous musical experience may contain healing properties when bodies, heartbeats, and our consciousnesses are entrained or aligned. Superordinate goals. Researchers and peace builders also name that superordinate goals are building blocks of cohesion, belonging, and peace. The superordinate goal occurs when individuals of different identities work toward a shared purpose. In early social psychology with peace-building research, researchers often studied summer camps that brought together Palestinians and Israeli children. Superordinate goals in these contexts allow participants to make
The
connections.
liminal space, the ritual space of something set apart can make it easier to see other identities that we each hold, because each one of us belongs to many different groups, from our education level, our profession, our language, our region, our gender. There's always one identity or more that we share. So it's a matter of creating a ritual space where people can find those other identities. And yeah, I think the ritual lubricates or makes it easier for someone to shift the identity that they are speaking from, so that people start talking to each other as two mothers rather than Muslim, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, whatever.
So sometimes when we enter a shared goal, we can drop our conflicting identities to pick up other identities that are more meaningful and connect us across peoples. I love music because music can also allow us to perform ourselves into new ways of integrative being. But let's turn to belonging badly. As a peace builder, I'm interested in when does belonging become a pathway to violence and exclusion? Before she was executed in World War II concentration camps, Edith Stein wrote about the problems of empathy. She all too well knew that when we lost our critical and reflective self to an aroused swirl of mob mentality, great atrocities can occur. In World War II examples, music could be a mechanism to tighten belonging adherence to the exclusion of outgroups. As the US entered World War I, rhetoric from Teddy Roosevelt and others claimed that a hyphenated American was no American at all. Dr. Douglas Baumberger explored the politics.
Part of our country's history from the very beginning, and the idea of who really belongs in a nation that is in large part a nation of immigrants. A recurring theme in American history is the idea that descendants of older immigrants are very eager to put up barriers for new immigrants. And we see this today. We see it in the 1920s, and we see it in 1917. And the crux of the issue was that at this time, there were at least 9 million Americans in the United States who self-identified as German Americans. And so when the United States went to war with Germany, the question became, how do we know which of these millions of German Americans is loyal? How do we know which ones might be a threat to national security? And one of the ways in which people created a litmus test for the time period was through the Star Spangled Banner. And so there arose almost overnight new traditions surrounding this anthem. It was not yet the official national anthem of the United States. That would not happen until 1931. But what was happening at this time, though, was that there were unspoken expectations. And one of those was that people would stand up when the national anthem was played. And so this had not been a thing before this time.
Sonia de los Santos also spoke to me of the dislocation of belonging and who gets to be an American.
That's something that I consider all the time. When in the last election, not to get super political, but I'll tell you about it. It was really hard for me. I kind of felt like I chose the country to build my life in, that more than half of the country did not want me here. That's all I could think about. And I could think, what am I doing? Am I doing any good trying to do this and being who I am here and sharing my stories? Anybody appreciating it? And I know it's a very selfish way to say, oh, it's about me. But it's kind of how it struck me. And so that's always in the back of my head.
Research on belonging also has much to teach us about school bullying. Peter Smith notes that school bullying unfolds over time and in contexts of differentiated power. Notions of belonging are at play in both the hierarchical conditional belonging of perpetrators and the resistant belonging of school connectedness and arts participation. Finally, we can't talk about belonging badly without talking about stereotype threat, one of the most researched areas in social psychology. In research by Cohen and others, we have significant replication studies that point to the following. One, that minoritized students experience the threat of being stereotyped in certain situations. Two, stereotype threat creates a kind of cognitive load tax on academic performance and performance in other contexts. And three, this cognitive load tax can explain many of the named racial and gender achievement gaps in education. An individual under stereotype threat experiences a continuous form of belonging uncertainty where the slightest misstep becomes overwhelming evidence that an individual doesn't belong. This phenomena of stereotype threat offers an example of the impact of small acts of intention. Using one methodology in a research study, Cohen and Walton found that simply asking students about their values has the potential to strengthen the academic resilience of students who are under stereotype threat. We seem to have a desire to want to matter and to be known for who we are and what we value. So as I bring this talk to a close, I want to offer a reflection on belonging repair and expansion. Elements of belonging repair and expansion include artistic restoring, perspective taking, kindness, hospitality, circle process, and centering our work as situation crafters within laboratories of belonging. Shreyoshi Day talked beautifully about the work of restoring to make other voices matter.
In this piece, I show her adorning herself and feeling as much in love as anybody else, any other woman from an upper class would be. I gave her that voice. She has two love songs in my piece where she is with him and just considering herself to be no less beautiful than anybody else. So traditionally, characters such as these are not accorded this status, and I really wanted to give that to her because to me, she's no different from any other woman.
So in that excerpt, Shreyoshi was trying to take a minoritized character in the Mahabharata and give that character more agency. Inspired by her work, we should look at the stories that we have built and ask who is missing, who has been flattened to a supporting role, and how might music and the arts be entrusted with the task of restoring to imagine new worlds of belonging. Perspective taking, empathy, and imagination are at the heart and soul of peace work and pro-social behavior. Music and the arts have always been about imagining into new perspectives. Kindness, generosity, and hospitality lower the thresholds of belonging with an embrace that is increasingly necessary across a time of climate change and human migration. My work with Puerto Rican Bomba y Plena was the work of using the arts to re-signify higher education space as a space that offers the opportunity for belonging to Puerto Rican communities. How might the arts re-signify different spaces? How might music adopt more genres and open doors even more broadly? Finally, circle process. In my adoption of world music drumming, I love a musical methodology that places us in a circle and removes music for the oral experience of listening and eye contact. Kay Pranis, one of the great peace builders, writes, "The teaching of circle process tells us that every action affects everything in the universe, that it is impossible to isolate something to act on it without affecting everything else. Whether literally or metaphorically, our sense of music making and other acts can be constructed in dreams of circles." Finally, I want to return to this profound idea that we are all situation crafters, asking us what kinds of situations can we create? What are the barriers to belonging in a given context? And what are the micro to macro acts that we might express to enliven our belonging? And in closing, I want to return to challenges of loneliness, ecological dislocation, and the understanding that without more expansive forms of interconnection, we may be destined to repeat cycles of violence. I believe in the magic of music and the arts done well, for the powers of synchrony, restoring, perspective taking, superordinate goals, identity construction, power exploration, and the curiosity of our emotional lives. With each step into the arts, I'm going to turn it off so that people in Zoom can hear. With each step within the arts, I believe that we represent a space for exploring belonging and can dream how a more connected we might respond to the challenges of the now and the yet to come. Thank you. I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
We can't get a copy of your script at any time, right?
Sure, I'm happy to send a copy of the script.
No, I was just joking, but boy, I couldn't write it.
Yeah, and I apologize. I am pushing the 5 years of research into 44 minutes. So it was much faster, just more disjointed than I would like. But I think I needed to put this together in the 44 minutes so I could figure out how things connected. And then later on, I'll start pulling it back out.
It's amazing to me that you could do that much in 5 years. That sounds like 3,500 years of research.
A lot of curiosity. So.
It's very intellectualized, very emotional. My responses.
Yeah, and I think that's peace builders. When we get into the work of peace building, our heart and soul is in it, and we oftentimes need the social psychology and the social science fields to strengthen and amplify what we're doing. So that's what I've been trying to do the last year in particular.
I think my life review could be done with each of those points. I mean, that's how I identify, like what Julie was saying. I mean, it's emotional and it's objective and it connects with my life.
We were talking about music as part of a process that helps to do this. It struck home with me. I grew up in a Methodist church in New England, and they had choirs for children starting when we were about 5 or 6 years old. And then as you grew older, you moved to the next choir and the next choir till you were in high school. And I'm still singing in choirs, so it must have done some kind of good. But it was just very interesting to hear that.
Yeah, I have the perspective of a parent right now. right? And it's really fun to watch both my daughter and my son and see what music does to them. They were performing yesterday, and like just the act of a child getting up on a stage and a whole community celebrating them for what they've done. That's a big part of identity creation for a child.
Yeah.
And so I feel similar in some ways as I hear you tell your story about moving through levels, that I can hear my children moving through their levels, their journey right now.
Yeah. The real little ones, we were cherubs
Mm-hmm.
to start. Cherubs, chapel, and chants worked our way up.
Thinking about our kids too, like with Mike and Karen, they had an immediate group with their ensembles when they were at college. Well, plus I guess your freshman seminar do them too. But an immediate group that's looking at the same goal, right? And with McGonagall, with Jonah, had a similar experience there. I think he connected more quickly with band and orchestra. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Friendships
there.
Yeah. I go back to that the fact that that word ensemble is French and it means together, right?
Yeah.
And so in many ways, I'm starting to think maybe it is the study of togetherness. That's ensemble study, is togetherness studies. But, you had a question.
Yeah, I'm thinking from my major was German. Belonging, what identified with Julie is the longing as a root word that is there. But in German, it is gehören. It's listen, it's hear. To hear others, to fully hear. Just fascinating word to research.
Yeah, there's one whole study on how each culture has differing gradations of words, and what does that say about each culture? It's really a fascinating area. Yeah,
it's a lot of things with words in German.
Yeah.
Very verbal culture.
In fact, my next podcast is going to study techno dance culture within Berlin and how the language of belonging is articulated in that context. It's fascinating.
Yeah. We were talking about developing that sense of belonging. I'm interested in repairing when that is not, when that has been broken or never developed. I'm thinking of minority communities that need to be in a majority, a majority white community and the smaller Black or Hispanic group within that community, and how the different cultures can come together in some way to repair that sense of belonging.
Yeah, I'm interested in, I mean, that's what I love about the field of peace building, and the peace building doesn't stop at the hurt, but it goes to what's the repair. Fortunately, there's a deep well of research on that particular question. We know that different communities have different pathways to belonging, like differences between a Latino community and a Black community. But we have some evidence of some tricks, like just asking people about what their values are tends to allow a student who's minoritized to say, oh, this teacher cares about me and they actually know what I believe in. That's one thing. There's another piece. Gosh, it just escaped. Another thing is that when you write feedback to people on their papers, if you need to give some hard news, like this paper earned a C, you say, I graded this with tough standards because I believe in you. And if you add that phrase, because I believe in you, it changes everything. And they have research, especially with Black students, that it encourages persistence. And so, yeah,
You're talking about doing that in a classroom. How do we do that in a congregation?
Well, I wrote an article where I asked that question, like, what does because I believe in you look like in other spaces? You know, I like playing with some of those things. Like, what does because I believe in you look like in a church congregation? What is asking people about what matters to them? What does that look like in a church congregation as well? And I think the beauty of faith formation is that there's a place to ask what matters to you. So, yeah, but we need to do that though also across the boundaries of our communities. That's increasingly hard on social media. Tangents there.
I belong to a bell card. It used to be every person. Excuse me.
Yeah, so we are close to 10:15, so I'll take maybe a last question or two.
Quick question, I guess. Well, probably not a quick answer, but it feels like there's a lot of tension in society, in the world, and I think some of this has to do with defining lines of who belongs and who doesn't, and maybe even some people's feelings that belonging is an important thing, and other people maybe don't value it as much. I don't know. But how do you include people who don't believe in being including, or you know, yeah.
I think for me, empathy is the first task there. But yeah, but I feel like this is the work in front of us right now. My personal prediction, if I go back to the United Nations data, the United Nations is predicting that in the next 50 years, as a result of climate change, we're going to have mass levels of human migration. And we know that human beings, we developed with an evolutionary idea of tribalism, because to know our tribe was a protective factor in our human experience. And to be distrustful of others outside the tribe helped us stay alive. But yet the challenge that's in front of us confronts that thing a little bit. We're going to need to figure out how to feel safe and be expansive at the same time. And I don't know the answers to that. And I think also, I'm worried about the rise of autocracy around the world right now. And it seems to be a response to uncertainty and to threat. And so then the question, how do we lower forms of threat so that we feel like we don't need to find the next autocrat who's going to save everything that, is going to be there for us. So I think at least in my field of peace, I'm really paying attention to autocracy and ecology and how that intersects with some of our more primal responses and how we move beyond that.
Thank you so much. We'll be thinking about this. I'll be thinking about this for a while, so thank you.
Thank you for your attention. I always appreciate this group because I feel like I can try out new ideas and you all are so generous with me. So I'm really grateful for the space.
Thank you, Gavin.
Mm-hmm.